Adam Scott's swing has been compared numerous times to Tiger Woods' 2000 swing. There are an enormous amount of similarities in both of the swings, both coached by Butch Harmon at the same time, both really nice and wide, flowing, lovely rhythms to both swing, very, very similar, but there are subtle differences. We're going to go through that in this analysis today. So if we bring them both to setup, you'll see very, very similar setups in that both of their arms hang below the shoulders. Nice little bit of neutral spine there, a little bit of rounding. You'll probably say the subtle differences are that if we look at Tiger, look where that ball is. It's right in the middle of the club. Whereas Adam, it's on the heel, so subtle difference there. And Adam's a little bit more tilted with that pelvis than Tiger, where he's a little bit more flat. You could maybe constitute that down to using different clubs, but you do see that with the difference throughout the bag with Tiger and Adam. But let's take them away and let's have a look. I mean, you'll see a little bit of difference here on that takeaway. So if we bring Adam back to shaft parallel, very similar positions, but also very, very different. So if we look in the traditional sense, both of them have that club head outside the hands. That club head is nicely sort of squared to the back line. Very, very similar position. Like, I know the camera angles are subtly different, but you can see very, very similar position in terms of what the club head is doing there. Now, you will notice subtle difference. You'll have to really watch this through at full speed. If we look at Tiger there, that right forearm is a little less supinated, so more in pronation, more facing this way, whereas Adam's going to work that forearm a little bit more, that right forearm, a little bit more supinated, very subtly, but it will change the position, especially later on in the swing and transition. But that's all from takeaway. So Adam's just rotating that forearm or supinating that right forearm a little bit more than Tiger, and you'll see that as well in the way they both set the club. But a lot of similarities there. The other subtle difference that we'll notice with Adam as opposed to Tiger is watch how Adam moves back off the ball. Can you see that move? Back off the ball. That's primarily why he addresses the club in the heel. So subtle difference there, whereas Tiger, you can really see it there, how that forearm's staying a little bit more in pronation looking at the ball, whereas Adam is a little bit more rotated. So subtle, very subtle difference there, but it is worth noting. I mean, how good is that for a takeaway? Just very traditional, very textbook, very Butch Harmon-esque. So this is the next stage where we'll notice a little bit of difference between the swings, is that Adam, because of that more supinated right forearm, will then set the club a little bit more through those wrists, get a little bit more wrist set as it's traditionally known in the golf world. So just bring it up there. Whereas if we look at Tiger, very little wrist set there, more structured with his wrist, just nice and wide. We'll bring it up. So you'll note that when that lead arm is parallel, that Tiger has a little less rest set than Adam, just because of how initially that right forearms work. Adam from face on's very much got sort of 90 degrees of wrist set, whereas Tiger's very wide, less wrist set there. Subtle differences to note as well. You'll see how Adam's left knee is a little bit more in front of his right, whereas Tiger's a little bit more stationary, less hip turn from Tiger, you could probably say there. So subtle differences, but then if we look at the similarities, both of the hands are pretty much in the center of the chest there. Very, very similar, very nice and wide as well. So then if we bring it up to the top, because of the way that right forearms work with Adam, you're going to notice slight difference at the top here, in that Adam is a little bit longer in the swing than Tiger. You'll see that right forearm, that right arm a little bit more behind the body, just because of how he's swinging initially at takeaway. Now, if we just for comparison's sake, if we take Adam and stop him sort of short of parallel, you'll see a lot of similarities there. You'd probably say Adam is a little bit more rotated than Tiger in 2000, but very, very similar. If we just bring them back to the same position, the top of the backswing here, you can see it's a very, very similar position from both. Subtle differences are that Adam's probably a little bit more rotated and a little bit longer in that swing with a little bit more wrist set, whereas Tiger's a little bit shorter, a little bit wider, you could probably say. And there's a subtle difference in that lead wrist in that Adam's got a little bit more of a cup, whereas Tiger is very much straight with that left arm. So very, very similar, but subtly different as well. So if we then look at the takeaway, this downswing, should I say, you'll see how Tiger really starts to drive everything down. Everything moves down towards the ground. Look, down, really compressing down, really powerful move. And you can see how much talked about Tiger's head moving down, whereas Adam's going to be a lot more passive. You can see how it's just a little bit more fluid through that body, not as much downward movement. So that's going to cause some subtle differences. You'll also see in the way that the shaft pitches the difference between Tiger and Adam. Tiger's going to move this shaft more down linearly, and there's going to be less of a shallowing, whereas Adam, because of that supination in the start of the swing, is going to pitch that shaft a little bit more shallow. That right arm's going to work a little bit more below his left, which we'll really see in a couple of frames time. You'll see that, look how that club just pitches a little shallower, whereas Tiger's just a little bit more on that same plane because of the way that right arm works in backswing and also how he moves in transition. So if you look at the same position here, we get rid of those lines, what you'll see is that Adam's right elbow is a lot lower than his left, whereas Tiger still lower, but it's not as much as Adam, and that results in a shaft plane that's much more shallower than Tiger's. So it's again a subtle difference, and we'll also talk about how that affects the body movement later on in the downswing. So subtle difference there, but again, if we just look at it from sort of the naked eye's perspective, it looks very, very similar. You could probably also say Adam has a little bit more rotation through the hips here, and that is apparent because he's also shallowed it more, which is the sort of matchup you'll see when guys like Tiger are a little bit steeper in transition. You won't see as much body rotation through that midsection. So if we just get rid of those lines and bring them down a couple of frames further, let's bring them down to a similar position here. Just back up Adam so we're in a very similar position. You'll see again Adam's a little bit more shallower in both positions. Those guys are dissecting that shaft plane in between the forearms. Love that position. Like I say, that right elbow is just a little bit lower in Adam's swings than Tiger, but as well what we'll see with both guys is that right shoulder is pretty much in line with that right elbow. It's a great position for transferring the power. You'll see a lot of amateurs get that right arm behind or in front, which is not a great way of delivering speed and power to the club head. So they both do a great job there. They're both sort of maintaining that posture through. You'll know as well that Adam, you'll see this in a couple more frames actually, how Adam rotates a lot more than Tiger, primarily down to the way that right arm moves in transition. So it's just more of a matchup, so we'll try and get them both at the same frame here, and this is where you'll start to really see some differences in the body. Now in terms of the club, if I try and get them at the same position, similar positions, you'll see the club shaft is nicely behind the hands in both guys. That right knee's kicked inwards, very, very similar, but you'll see, look how much more of Tiger's shirt we can see than Adam. Adam, you can't really see that center of the rib cage or the sternum, whereas Tiger you can. That's just because he's pitched the shaft a little bit steeper in downswing, very subtly, whereas Adam's just laid it behind him more, and I think primarily that is due to that takeaway difference. So then if we bring them down a couple more frames just before impact, you'll see again very similar, very different as well. You'll see how Tiger's much more face on, whereas Adam's a little bit more rotated through that thorax. You'll see it through the hips that Adam, you can see more of those butt cheeks than Tiger, a little bit more rotated just because of how that shaft has shifted more less steep, should I say, than Tiger in downswing. So that is why the impact positions are subtly different, but very, very similar at the same time. Then if we bring them a couple of frames through, so let's get them to this position, you'll see very Butch Harmon-esque in that the way that the club head is releasing through the ball. You'll see a little bit more active hands through Tiger in that release, just because he is a little bit less rotated, whereas Adam is a little bit more rotated, so you see less of a release there from Adam. But you see subtle differences there. Look at the difference in that chest position. Tiger's going to look a little bit steeper through the shoulders, but that's just primarily because he's not as open as Adam. You can see that there, how his chest is pointing very much towards the target, whereas Tiger's more down. You can see how Tiger's head's a little bit more down, whereas Adam started to rotate the eyes out to the target. Subtle, very different, but very similar. Bit of an oxymoron there. You'll see also Adam's foot. You can see how you can see the spikes on his shoes, whereas Tiger, you cannot. That's just again through rotation. If we bring them up to again a couple of frames later, you can see because Adam has a little bit more rotation, I mean, you can really see that through that foot there than Tiger, where it's more planted, and Adam's shaft is exiting more left than Tiger, where it's up over that shoulder. And you can see also, look at the head, look how Adam's pointing out to the target, whereas Tiger's more down. So again, subtle differences there. Bringing them up to a similar position, you'll see how Tiger is exiting much more over that left shoulder, whereas Adam's really under that left shoulder. So subtle, and he's also a little bit more up on that heel again. And let's bring him up a couple of frames after. Very, very similar position there, but again, you'll notice Adam's a little bit more left in his exit, hence why you see less of a separation between those arms, whereas Tiger, that left arm's just a little bit more out, just because it's more up. Let's bring him up to the finish. Again, very similar. That club's wrapped around them, both pointing at the target. Nice full release with the trail foot. You'll notice subtle difference in that Tiger shaft's a little bit more horizontal, whereas Adam's more vertical, if you could say that, more at 45 degrees, but very, very similar in a lot of ways. Now, when we look at these swings at full speed, or even in sort of slow motion without analysis, you can see that there is a lot of similarities in the tempo, in where they pitch the shaft at the top of the swing. So you see a lot of similarities, especially in the finish, how they got that nice full release finish, but it's a very, very different swing. Probably unfair to Adam in 2000 that he got a lot of comparisons to Tiger, because that ultimately made him the next Tiger Woods, which never really happened for him. Still had a great career, or still has a great career, much like Tiger, but very, very similar. But again, subtle differences. No two swings are the same, no matter what the TV commentators say. And hopefully this subtle little analysis has shown there are some little differences that you might not know at full speed, but you can definitely see when they're broken down. But I'll tell you what, I'd take any of these guys' swings. Great action. Just love the swings both.